The Barkley Marathon was run this past week. How many of you out here know what the Barkley is? You don't have any hands risen in Southampton. The Barkley is considered one of the toughest ultramarathons in the world. It's about 100 miles long. It takes place in Frozen Head State Park in East Tennessee. The runners are required to run 5 loops up and down mountains with a total elevation gain of 60,000 feet if you complete all 5 loops. The 5 loops need to be completed in 60 hours. This race began in 1986, and less than 20 people have completed this race successfully in all of its 37 years. No woman has ever finished this race to date. These circumstances alone make it an unusual ultramarathon, yet it gets even weirder. Registration is complicated. According to Wikipedia, this is what you do if you wish to run this race. The Barkley is limited to 40 runners and fills up quickly the day that registration opens. Requirements and times, in order to get in, you need to submit an entry application. And how it's a closely guarded secret. You have to know somebody who knows something in order to figure out how to actually apply for this race. Potential entrants must complete an essay on why I should be allowed to run in the Barkley. You need to pay $1.60 as an application fee. Then you need to complete other requirements which change every year. If you are accepted, you receive a letter of condolence. Upon arriving, first-time Barkley runners are required to bring a license plate from their state or country as part of their entrance fee. Previous racers are required to bring an additional fee, which in the past has included things such as white shirts, socks, or flannel shirts, or a donation for being a non-finisher. These donations are based on the current needs of Lazarus Lake, who is the guy that created this race. Prior to the finishers of the marathon, prior finishers to the marathon, people that have finished, when they return to run the race again, they have to bring a pack of Camel cigarettes as their registration fee. The race bib number 1 is always given to the person whom they deem will not complete one loop of the race. The race begins anywhere between midnight and noon on the race day. No one knows what time the race is going to begin. When the runners arrive, they wait to get ready. They have started it as early as midnight. And a conch is blown, and then there's an hour from the time that conch is blown to the time that the racers go. They line up at the starting line, which is also the finish line, and the founder, Lazarus Lake, lights up a cigarette, and that's the indication for the runners to go. Runners are not allowed to wear smartwatches or GPS devices. They navigate the trail with compasses, and the trail changes every year. There are slight deviations. I had not heard about this race until a few years ago when we watched a movie on Netflix called The Barkley Marathon, The Race That Eats Its Young. If you want to see it now, it's on Amazon Prime or Apple TV. Now I can't stop watching it. Every year I follow it as much as possible, and no one's really there to see it, right? There's just a very small group of things, and it was Twitter. It was a Twitter account that kept pushing out what was happening on this race. Finishing the Barkley in the runner's world is a huge badge of honor. It's a high achievement. This year's race, which ended on Friday, saw 3 people complete the course and that's the first 3 people to complete the course since 2017. They didn't have any finishers from 2017 until 2023. This race changed the way I see endurance running. It changed my perception of what a marathon is. It's helped me to see that humans can choose to take on challenges, and how doing something hard sometimes is a matter of just putting one foot in front of another. That the human spirit can rally around someone and encourage them and help them along the way to achieve their goals. This race, in all of its peculiarities, helps me see and delight in the human spirit. Samuel, in our reading today, is also in the midst of learning how to see things in a new way. Before Samuel can see what God is asking him to do, he has to first lay aside some of his preconceived notions and some of his assumptions. He has to lay aside the things he thinks he knows and look at things in a new way. So a long time ago, when this was a newly forming kingdom of Israel, God appointed a king. The king's name was Saul, and Saul became the king, and as a lot of kings do, he began to become corrupt and ineffective. And although Saul was the right king for his country at one time, his reign had become tarnished. And the time had come for a new king to be appointed. And it was assumed by all that the new king would be one of Saul's own sons, because that was the way they did it back then, and that's still the way they do it today. But these men, too, are not whom God wishes to be the king. So Samuel is the high priest in the kingdom. And he knows that all is not right with the kingdom. And he is disappointed in King Saul. And he knows that God is disappointed in King Saul as well. But Samuel's not sure what to do about it. So one night when Samuel is sleeping, God comes to him in a dream and tells him he is going to be the one who is going to anoint the new king. This new king will not be one of the old king's children. So Samuel is sent to Bethlehem, to a small remote village to anoint a king from one of Jesse's children. But Samuel has a problem. How can he do this and not get the present king upset? Because if he's going to anoint a new king who is not the king's heir, he could be in danger. But God offers a solution. He says to Samuel, take a heifer and say that you are going to Bethlehem to make a sacrifice. So Samuel goes as God told him to do, and he offers a sacrifice. And while they are sharing in the sacrificial rites, Samuel begins to speculate which one of Jesse's sons, Jesse who lives in Bethlehem, that God has chosen as Saul's successor. So he looks over all the sons as they come forward and begins to enter into a conversation with God. So Jesse's first son comes in. He's big and he's strong and he's beautiful and he looks like the perfect king. But it's not. Look deeper, says God. Look deeper than that. Look deeper beyond appearances. How about the next one, Abinadab? What about Shammon, the third son? Are these the ones that you have chosen to be the king? But God says no. Not these or any other of Jesse's 7 sons. The sons that are there. And Samuel says, so what now? So God asks Samuel to look beyond what he cannot see. Because what he sees in front of him is Jesse and 7 sons. So he asks questions, and he says, well, are there any more sons? And sure enough, there is a son. There's a small son, the youngest son. He's in the fields with the sheep. So this son is brought in. And this is the one that God chooses. The smallest, the youngest, the one who looks least like a king, is David, the shepherd. And as we know, as we follow the story forward, that David becomes the king. Seeing things in a new way. There's a lot of that going on in the John reading as well. A lot of blindness, and very little of the blindness belongs to the actual blind man in the story. Jesus and his disciples are walking down the road on their way from the temple. They have spent the day there and have been amidst of different conversations about who God is and how God is in the world and how God wants people to live. And Jesus has been challenged about what he is saying about God because, quite frankly, the God that Jesus is talking about does not fit into the box that the scribes and Pharisees have for who they believe God to be and how they think God is in the world and how they think God wants them to be in the world. Jesus' friend, who had been alongside him a while, and these discussions and debates have been going on. So as they leave their temple, they are still thinking about everything they heard. But as they're walking down the road, they encounter a blind man who has been blind since birth. And they continue their temple conversations by asking big questions that we all wrestle with sometimes. Like, how come he's blind? Did he deserve to be blind? Did he do something to cause his own blindness? Did his parents sin to cause his blindness? Were his parents bad? What did someone do in order to make this man blind? And Jesus said, you've got the wrong end of the stick. His blindness is not about punishment or retribution or payment for sins. Jesus said, he is blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. Think about that. We are blind so that God's works might be revealed in us. So that God will be revealed. Isn't that what we're about as well? We are born the way that we are so that God's works in us can be revealed through us. Our bodies, abled or disabled, seeing or blind, male or female, are vessels that we use to be the hands and heart of God in the world, manifesting God's work, revealing God in the world. And then Jesus, knowing that this really isn't about the physical blindness of the man, it was never about his physical blindness. He bent down into the dirt and he grabbed a handful and he spit and made it into mud. And then he rubbed that mud into the man of the eyes of the man. And the man opened his eyes, bathed in mud, and saw the world as a sighted person. And here's the thing. This story challenges us to look at what we are blind to. Because I'm pretty sure that when you look at all the characters in the story, you'll probably find more Pharisee in me than other people. I have questions about being a disciple. I'm pretty good at ignoring what I don't want to look at. I know that I too search for escapes and I find excuses for allowing things to go on that I kind of think probably aren't the way they should go. I know that I close my eyes sometimes to the truth of Jesus' message. That way I don't have to see what may be hard for me to deal with, so that I don't have to change my comfortable patterns, so that I don't have to change my life. So I don't need to leave my comfort zones or think or act in another way, in a way that's unfamiliar or uncomfortable or makes me feel a little edgy, or because sometimes I'm asked to reach out to someone who frightens me or shocks me or I don't deem as safe. If I don't see any problems in the world, then there's no reason to make any change. The thing about seeing something new or discovering a new vision within is that we only have two real choices. We can forget about it, pretend we didn't see it, that what we saw was maybe a figment of our imagination, like the Pharisees are trying to do in this morning's gospel reading, or you can be open to the new vision and you can change. And then you will never see things the same way again. Like how to run an ultramarathon. The Pharisees in today's story cannot and will not accept that this man Jesus is anything more than a show-off or a sham. And that Jesus cannot be a representative of God, because if they accept that, then they will have to change how they think. If they believe that this man Jesus is the Son of God and he is speaking for God and is acting as God wants and is sharing the truth about God and the world, then they will have to change their minds. Changing our minds is one of the hardest things that we will ever do. Because everything that we know to be true has to shift. Because what if God really does not care about the rules and instead cares about the people? Even if they're sinners, even if they're prostitutes, even if they're tax collectors. And what if God does not see the way the Pharisees see or interpret the laws the way that the Pharisees interpret the laws? What if they are wrong and are not doing God's will as they think they are? What if there is another way? This is what God is challenging us today, to look at something different, to see another way. Much like that kaleidoscope, that you shift it just a little bit, and what you see inside is a little bit different. And every time you shift it, you see things in a new way. This is what God is challenging us to do, to look at something different, to see things in another way, to see through the eyes of God, to allow the mud and spit of Christ to open our eyes so that we can see the world as we have never seen it before. The gift of God's sight helps us see beyond, helps us see deeper, helps us see more. Thanks be to God for the gift of sight that changes and changes and changes.